You cleaned toilets for a living. Brooke's voice cracked across the reception hall, and then her hand cracked across my mother's face. 300 guests went silent at once. Somewhere near the band, a champagne flute slipped out of someone's fingers and shattered on the marble. My mother did not flinch. She touched her cheek, slowly, the way you touch a bruise you felt 100 times before. Then she looked at the woman I had married 90 minutes earlier, and she said very quietly, "You have no idea what I do." Outside, tires rolled over gravel. One vehicle, then another, then 6 more. Black Escalades, in a single unbroken line, headlights sweeping through the tall windows and washing across all those stunned, beautiful faces. And everything the Callahan family had spent 30 years building began to come apart. But to understand why a line of black SUVs could end a wedding, you have to go back with me. Back before the slap. Back before I understood the first real thing about the woman who raised me. 3 weeks earlier, I thought I was the luckiest man in the state of Connecticut. My name doesn't matter as much as hers does, but you can call me Devin. I was 31 years old. I had a good job at an engineering firm, and I was 2 weeks away from marrying Brooke Callahan, the most polished, poised, put-together woman I had ever met. The Callahans lived in a world I had only ever seen from the outside. A long white house at the end of a private drive. A country club with a name older than the town. Dinners where 3 forks meant 3 courses and everyone already knew which one to pick up first. I grew up somewhere else entirely. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the floor hummed all day from the dryers below. My mother, Vivian, raised me there by herself. My father left when I was 4. I don't remember his face. I only remember the sound of the door, and my mother sitting at the kitchen table afterward, not crying, just very still, like she was doing math in her head. She was always doing math in her head. Vivian is a small woman with a straight back and silver streaks running through her dark hair, which she keeps in a neat low bun. She has these warm, steady eyes that make you feel like you've already been forgiven for something. When I was young, she wore the same Navy work uniform almost every day. She told me she cleaned offices downtown. She left before the sun came up and came home after it went down, and on the weekends she took a second job. I want you to hear this clearly because it matters later. Everything I have, she paid for with her hands and her hours. Braces, a used trumpet for the school band, 3 years of community college before I transferred out on a scholarship. She never once said she was tired, though I know now she must have been exhausted in her bones. There is one memory I keep coming back to. I was maybe 10. It was raining and I had a fever, and she stayed home from work to sit with me, which she almost never did. I remember asking her, "Mom, are we poor?" And she smiled and said, "We are rich in the ways that count, and we are careful about the rest." I thought I understood that sentence. I would spend the next 20 years learning that I had understood almost none of it. So when I brought Brooke home to meet her, I was nervous in a way I couldn't explain. Not because I was ashamed of my mother. I want to be honest with you because if I'm not honest here, none of the rest of this means anything. Part of me was ashamed of where I came from. Part of me had spent years quietly stepping out of that apartment above the laundromat and into a bigger, brighter life, and I did not want the 2 worlds to touch. That shame is my flaw. I'm not proud of it, but you should know it was there, because it's the reason I ignored so many things I should have seen. The first dinner my mother cooked. She made the food I grew up on, the food that meant love in our house, and she set the table with the good plates, the ones with the little blue flowers that she'd bought one at a time over the years. Brooke arrived in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my mother's monthly rent. She was gracious. She said all the right things. She complimented the apartment in that careful way that means the opposite. "It's so cozy," she said, looking at the water stain on the ceiling. "So authentic." My mother just smiled and passed her the rice. Later, when Brooke went to the restroom, my mother leaned close to me and said something I brushed off at the time. She watches you when you're not looking, Devin. But she watches the room more. Mom, I said. Be nice. I am being nice, she said. I'm telling you the truth quietly. That's the nicest thing I know how to do. I laughed it off. I thought she was just being a mother. I thought she was jealous of the time I gave to someone else. I did not understand yet that my mother had spent 40 years reading people for a living, and that she was almost never wrong. The Callahans, when I finally met them, were something to behold. Gerald Callahan was a tall man with silver hair swept back like a senator, and a handshake that lasted a beat too long. The kind of handshake that's measuring you. Diane Callahan wore pearls and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Their house had a staircase that curved up into a chandelier, and every surface held a photograph of the family, looking like they'd been born mid-vacation. They were kind to me in the way rich people are kind to a project. Encouraging, a little surprised. Gerald liked to clap me on the shoulder and say, "Self-made this one," as if my mother had not made me at all. And they asked questions. So many questions, and always about the same thing. What did I make at the firm? Did I have equity? Did I own or rent? And again, in 100 different polite disguises, one question underneath all the others. What was my family worth? I didn't notice the pattern at first. When you want to belong somewhere badly enough, you don't count how many times they ask what you're worth. You just keep answering, hoping the number is high enough. The first warning sign I actually let myself see came a month before the wedding. Brooke and I were addressing invitations at her parents' dining table, and she was going down the guest list with a gold pen, and she paused at my mother's name. "So," she said, not looking up, "your mom, at the wedding, what is she going to, wear?" "I don't know," I said. "A dress, I assume. Right? Of course." She tapped the pen. "It's just, the Whitmores are coming, and the Astons, and it's a certain kind of event, and I want your mom to feel comfortable. I don't want her to feel out of place." "She won't feel out of place," I said. "She's the most comfortable person I know." "Of course," Brooke said again. And then, lightly, like she was asking about the weather, "Does she have anything she does? Like, for work? People are going to ask, and I never really know what to tell them." I remember the exact temperature of that moment. The way the question was really an instruction. The way, "I never know what to tell them," meant, I've been telling them something else. "She cleans offices," I said. "She has for 30 years. I'm proud of her." Brooke smiled and said, "That's so sweet," and went back to the invitations. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself a lot of things were fine that spring. Here is what I did not know. I did not know that the Callahans were drowning. I found out later, piece by piece, the way you find out about a fire by first noticing the smoke. The long white house was mortgaged past its value. The country club membership was 3 years unpaid. Gerald's business, some kind of investment fund, had been quietly bleeding for a decade, and the family had been keeping up appearances the way you keep a sinking boat afloat by bailing faster than it fills. Everything they showed the world was real. It was just borrowed. And a daughter who married well, a daughter who married into money, was not a wish in that family. It was a plan. It was the plan. I was supposed to be the money. That's the part that still turns my stomach. They didn't want me for me. They looked at a young engineer with a scholarship and a good job and no visible family, and they made an assumption. They assumed the mother who cleaned offices had nothing, and they assumed the son was climbing, and they thought, this one is grateful, this one is hungry, this one will do anything to belong. And a grateful, hungry man who wants to belong is very easy to build a plan around. The strange thing is, my mother saw the whole shape of it before I did. And she said nothing, almost nothing. But she started acting differently. She began taking calls she stepped out of the room for. Quiet calls, short ones, where her voice changed into something I didn't recognize. Clipped, certain, the voice of someone giving instructions. One afternoon I stopped by her apartment and there was a car outside I'd never seen, long and black and clean, and a man in a dark suit standing beside it, And when I asked her about it, she just said, "A ride to a meeting," and changed the subject. "What meeting?" I asked. "Cleaning business," she said. "Contracts. Boring things." I believed her. Of course I believed her. She had never once lied to me that I knew of. Why would I start doubting the most honest person in my life? But the clues kept coming, and I kept not adding them up. We went to dinner once, the two of us, at a restaurant far nicer than the places we usually went. She said she wanted to treat me before the wedding. And when we walked in, the host straightened up like a soldier and said, "Ms. Ellison, welcome back," and led us to a table by the window without checking a list. The manager came out to shake her hand. She was warm with them, easy, like she'd been coming there for years, like she belonged in a way I was still only pretending to. "You come here a lot?" I asked. "Once in a while," she said, and studied the menu and would not meet my eyes. "I want to stop here and tell you about my mother's flaw because she has one, and it nearly cost her everything that mattered to her." My mother hid. She had spent so long being underestimated that she'd started to use it like armor. When she was young and had nothing, people treated her like she was nothing, and it hurt. And then later, when things changed, she discovered something worse. That when people found out she had something, they changed too. They got warm in a way that was really cold. They started calculating. She told me once, years later, "The first time I had a little money, I watched the people I loved turn into strangers who happened to know my name. My father was one of those people. I'll get to that." So she made a choice. She decided she would rather be underestimated than used. She would keep her real life invisible, and she would watch how people treated the invisible version of her, because that was the only way she knew to find out who actually loved her and who loved the idea of what she could give them. It was a wise strategy and a lonely one. And it meant that her own son walked to the edge of a cliff, and she watched and she stayed quiet because part of her needed to see whether I would step back on my own. I didn't, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The rehearsal dinner was the night everything I'd been ignoring finally raised its voice. It was at the club, in a private room with candles and a long table. And Gerald stood up to give a toast, glass raised, that senator smile on his face, and he said some words about family and love and joining two great houses. Two great houses. He actually said that. And then he looked at my mother, seated quietly near the end of the table in a simple gray dress, and he said, "And of course, we want to make Vivian feel like part of the family too. We know it's a big adjustment, coming into a world like ours. But we're generous people. We take care of our own." There was laughter. The wrong kind. The kind that lands on one person. My mother lifted her water glass, smiled, and said nothing. But under the table, I saw her hand go flat and still against the white cloth. That old gesture. Doing the math. Later, out on the terrace, I found her alone, looking at the dark golf course. "Mom," I said, "I'm sorry about Gerald. He gets like that when he drinks." "He gets like that always," she said. "The drinking just removes the manners." She turned to me. "Devin, I need to ask you one thing, and I need you to answer me like you're 12 years old and you can't lie to me yet." "Okay. Do you love her? Or do you love the house?" The question hit me somewhere I wasn't ready to be hit. "I love her," I said. But even as I said it, I heard the small delay before the words, the half-second where I had to check. My mother heard it too. She always heard the half-second. "All right," she said gently and touched my face. "All right, baby. Then I'll be there. I'll stand right up front and I'll be there for you. Whatever happens." "What do you mean, whatever happens?" She just smiled that soft, sad smile and went back inside. And I stood on the terrace with a feeling in my chest like a door had opened somewhere in the house and I couldn't tell if the wind was coming in or going out. The next morning, 2 days before the wedding, Gerald Callahan asked to meet me for coffee. Alone. We sat in the club dining room, empty at that hour, sunlight coming in gold across the tables. And Gerald talked for a while about nothing, about the weather, about my future, and then he set down his cup and got to it. "Devin," he said, Man to man. I'm going to be candid, because we're about to be family. Okay. Every family goes through seasons, even the strong ones. And the truth is, we've had a hard couple of years. Nothing we can't handle, but a hard couple of years. He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn. I've always believed that the strength of a family is how it comes together when it counts. And I think once you and Brooke are married and we're all one household, so to speak, there's an opportunity for us all to help each other. Help each other how? He named a number. I won't repeat it, but it was the kind of number that has commas in it, more commas than I'd ever seen in my own bank account. He wanted it as an investment, or a loan, or a gift. He kept changing the word while he talked, and every version of the word meant the same thing, which was that the marriage he wanted his daughter to have with me came with an invoice, and this was the first line item. Gerald, I said. My throat was dry. I don't have that kind of money. He smiled. The patient smile. Not you. I understand you're just starting out. But your mother. He leaned in. Devin, come on. A woman that age, 30 years of steady work, no expenses, lives in a little apartment. People like that, they don't spend. They save. They've got more tucked away than any of us. She could help. And frankly, joining a family like ours, it would be a smart move for her. A real step up. We could open doors for her too. I sat there and I understood all at once the whole architecture of it. The dinners, the questions, the invitations, the plan. They had looked at my mother, at her work uniform and her small apartment and the color of her skin, and they had made two calculations at the same time. That she must be poor, and that whatever she had, she owed them for the privilege of standing in their light. And they wanted me to go and ask her for it. I have to go, I said, and I stood up so fast the coffee cup rattled. Devin, Gerald said, still smiling, still calm, because in his world these conversations always ended his way eventually. Sleep on it. You'll see it's the sensible thing. We take care of family. Family takes care of us. I did not sleep on it. I drove straight to my mother's apartment. And that is where the last quiet hour of my old life happened. I told her everything. The number. The words that kept changing. The way he'd called it a step up for her. Like the honor of it should be payment enough. And I watched my mother listen, sitting at that same kitchen table with the blue flowered plates in the cabinet behind her. And I watched her face not change at all, which frightened me more than anger would have. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you still want to marry her?" "I don't know," I said. And it was the first true thing I'd said in weeks. 2 days ago I knew. Now I feel like I've been standing in a movie set. Like nothing behind the doors is real. Some of it is real, she said. She's real. What she feels for you, whatever it is, that's real in its way. People can love you and use you at the same time, Devin. That's the hard part. It would be easier if they only did one. Mom, I looked at her. Do you have money? And my mother looked at me for a long, long moment. And I saw her decide something. I saw her decide it wasn't time yet. I have enough, she said. I've always had enough. Don't marry her for me, and don't leave her for me. Do it because you know who you are. That's the only reason that ever holds up. I should have pushed. I should have asked the real question that was finally forming under all the others. But I was exhausted and heartsick, and I wanted the world to stay the shape it had been for one more day. So I hugged her and I drove home, and I told myself that in the morning I would figure it out. In the morning I told myself I would marry her, and love her, and refuse Gerald, and build a real thing out of the real part. I told myself the wedding could be the start of the truth instead of the end of the lie. I was wrong about almost all of it. But I was right about one thing. The wedding was the end of the lie. Just not my lie. The day itself was beautiful. I have to give the Callahans that. They knew how to build a beautiful thing on a foundation of nothing. White flowers everywhere. A string quartet. The reception hall at the club with its tall windows and its marble floor and 300 of the most important people in the county, all borrowed for one afternoon on credit the family couldn't cover. Brooke was stunning. When she came down the aisle I forgot, for a few minutes, every doubt I'd been carrying. She looked at me and I looked at her, and for the length of the vows it was just two people, and I meant every word, and I believe she did too. That's what I keep coming back to. I think in the ceremony we were real. The reception is where it all went wrong. Started small. It always does. Gerald was drinking. Diane was working the room with her frozen smile. And Brooke, I realized, was watching the door. Every few minutes her eyes went to the entrance of the hall, waiting for something, and getting tighter each time it didn't come. I found out later what she was waiting for. She was waiting for me to have talked to my mother. She was waiting for the money to be handled. Gerald had told her the deal was as good as done, that the grateful son would deliver, and she had built the entire day on top of that promise the way her parents built everything, out ahead of the truth. Around 9 o'clock, Gerald pulled my mother aside near the windows. I watched it happen from across the room, and I couldn't get there in time. I watched him lean in, warm and certain, and I watched him make his ask again, directly this time to her face, in the middle of my wedding. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I could read the shape of them, and I could read my mother's answer. She listened. She let him finish. And then she said something short and calm and final, and she turned and walked away from him toward the terrace doors, and Gerald Callahan stood there with his mouth slightly open, holding a glass, looking for the first time all day like exactly what he was, which was a man who had just been told no by someone he'd been certain he owned. I found out later what she said to him. My mother told me weeks after, when she finally told me everything. She said, "Gerald, I've cleaned the offices of men like you for 30 years, and I've learned that the ones who talk the most about taking care of family are usually the ones drowning it. I'm not going to save you, and I'd think very hard about what you've built this whole day on." Then she walked away, and Gerald, panicking, did the worst thing a drowning man can do. He grabbed his daughter as she passed, and he told her, in a hiss, that it was over, that the old woman had refused, that there was no money, that everything was about to come down. I saw Brooke's face change. I saw 20 years of pressure and fear and performance crack open all at once. And I understand it now. God help me, I even understand it. She had been raised to be a solution to a problem she wasn't allowed to know the size of. She had been told her whole life that her worth was her ability to marry the family out of a hole. And in that moment she believed the hole had just swallowed everything. And she believed it was the fault of the quiet woman in the gray dress standing by the windows. Brooke crossed the room. Fast. Everyone felt it before they saw it, the way a room feels a storm. She stopped in front of my mother. "You," Brooke said, loud enough now that heads turned. "You could fix this with a phone call, and you're going to sit there in your little dress and let my family fall apart. Do you have any idea who we are? Do you have any idea what you are? You clean toilets for a living." And she slapped her. The sound of it went all the way to the back of the hall. I was moving before I understood I was moving. But I was too far. I couldn't reach her. 300 people froze between us like a field of statues. My mother did not stumble. She did not raise a hand. She stood exactly where she was, and she touched her cheek, slow, and she looked at Brooke with something that was not anger and was not hurt. It was something worse for Brooke. It was pity. "You have no idea what I do," my mother said. And that is the exact moment we all heard the gravel. Tires. Outside. In the long silence you could hear everything. One vehicle rolling up the drive and stopping. Then a second. Then a third. Doors began to close, firm and even like a countdown. Through the tall windows, headlights swung across the room, one after another, until 8 black Escalades sat in a perfect line outside the club, engines ticking as they cooled. Nobody in that room knew what it meant, but everybody knew it meant something. You could feel the whole tone of the day tip on its axis. The doors of the hall opened. A woman walked in first. Sharp suit, tablet in hand, an earpiece, the kind of person who enters a room already knowing where everyone in it is standing. Behind her came 4 more people in dark suits, unhurried, carrying leather folios. And behind them, a man with silver at his temples and a briefcase who I would later learn was one of the most feared corporate attorneys on the eastern seaboard. The woman with the tablet scanned the room once, found my mother, and her entire posture changed. She crossed the floor, and in front of 300 of Connecticut's finest, she stopped before the woman in the gray dress and said, clearly, "Ms. Ellison, I apologize for the timing. The signing was moved up. The board is on the line and the buyer needs your decision tonight." Then quieter, seeing the red mark on my mother's cheek. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need us to handle something?" You have never heard a room so silent. My mother looked at me first, not at Brooke, not at Gerald, at me, and in her eyes was an apology, and a question, and 40 years of a secret she had carried alone. Then she looked at the woman with the tablet and said, "I'm fine, Renata. Give me a moment with my son." Renata, the chief of staff, the calls she stepped out to take, the car with the man in the suit, the restaurant where they knew her name, all of it finally in one place, adding up in front of the whole room at once. My mother, Vivian Ellison, was not a cleaning lady with a little nest egg tucked away. She was the founder and majority owner of the Ardent Group. I'll tell you what that meant, because I didn't know either, standing there in my wedding suit with my mouth open. 40 years earlier she had started with a single cleaning cart and 1 office building, the one she cleaned herself before dawn. And she had done what almost nobody does. She had saved and she had reinvested, and when the man who owned that first building went under, she had bought his contract. Then his building. Then 2 more. Facilities first. Then the real estate under them. Quietly, patiently, invisibly, one careful step at a time, for 4 decades, while she wore a Navy uniform and drove a used car and raised her son above a laundromat so he'd grow up knowing the value of $1 instead of the weight of one. By that night, the Ardent Group owned or managed commercial property in 11 states. My mother had a net worth that did not have commas so much as it had zeros. And she had told no one, not the neighbors, not her friends, not the Callahans, not me, because she needed to know. She needed to know who loved Vivian, the woman above the laundromat, before she ever let anyone meet Vivian Ellison, the woman with the Escalades. The Callahans had failed that test more completely than anyone in her life ever had. Gerald understood first. I watched it move across his face like ice cracking. Because Gerald, in his desperation over the last 2 years, had done exactly the thing that now destroyed him. When his funds started drowning, he had taken on debt from wherever he could get it, quietly, through brokers and holding companies and names that didn't mean anything to him. He had signed papers he didn't fully read because a drowning man signs anything that floats. And a portion of that distressed debt, the mortgage on the White House, the note on the very country club we were standing in, had been packaged and sold and resold until 3 weeks earlier it had been acquired by a large, patient, quiet real estate firm looking to expand in the region. The Ardent Group. That was the signing. That was why Renata had come. The deal my mother was stepping away to finalize that very night, the acquisition her board was waiting on, included the paper on everything the Callahan family had used to look down on her. She hadn't known, when she accepted the invitation to the wedding, that it would be her son marrying into it. She'd found out somewhere in those quiet 3 weeks, in those short clipped phone calls, when the files crossed her desk and she saw the names. That was why she'd asked me on the terrace whether I loved the house. That was why she'd said, "I'll be there whatever happens." She had walked into that wedding holding the fate of the family in a folio she never intended to open, hoping, praying, that her son would find his own way out before she ever had to. Gerald crossed the room now, all the color gone from him, and his voice came out cracked and small. "Vivian, please, we didn't know. And here is the part one will remember for the rest of my life. Here is the part that told me who my mother really was, more than the Escalades ever could. She could have ended them, A word to the attorney with the briefcase and the Callahans would have lost the house, the club, the name, all of it that night publicly, in front of everyone who had ever laughed at the wrong person. She had every legal right and every human reason. She didn't. My mother looked at Gerald, and at Diane frozen behind him, and at Brooke, who was standing very still now with her hand still half raised, understanding at last the size of the mistake she'd made and not yet the shape of it. And my mother said, quietly, so only the near part of the room could hear, "I'm not going to take your house tonight. I'm not going to say anything to these people. You'll do that yourselves, the way you always have, a little more every year, until there's nothing left to keep up. That was always going to happen. I just watched it happen faster." She turned to the attorney. "We'll close the deal Monday at the office. Not here. Not tonight." Then, to Renata, "I'd like to go home." And then she looked at me. "Devin," she said, "you can come with me or you can stay. But you should know that whatever you decide tonight, you decide it as yourself, not as anyone's plan. That's all I ever wanted for you. To be free enough to choose." The room was still watching. Brooke was crying now, silently, and I want to tell you the truth even though it doesn't make me look good. I still felt something for her. I looked at my new wife standing in the wreckage of the day, and I did not feel triumph, and I did not feel hate. I felt grief, because I had loved a version of her, and I finally understood that the version had been built on the same borrowed foundation as the house, and there was nothing solid under it to hold. I walked to my mother, and I took her arm, and in front of 300 people, the two of us walked out of that hall together, past the long line of black Escalades, and I helped her into the first one, and I got in beside her, and the door closed with that firm, even sound, and the noise of the reception disappeared like it had never been real at all. Because it never had been. We didn't talk much on the drive. She held my hand the way she used to when I was small and sick and she'd stayed home from work. After a while she said, "I'm sorry, Devin. I should have told you years ago. I told myself I was protecting you. But some of it was that I was protecting me. I was so afraid that if you knew, you'd become one of the people who looked at me and saw a number. I couldn't have survived that from you." Her voice broke, just slightly, for the first time all night. "You were the one person I couldn't bear to test and lose." "You didn't lose me," I said. "You never could have." "I almost did," she said. "I let you walk right up to that altar. I told myself it was your choice to make." But a mother who watches her child walk toward a cliff and calls it respecting his freedom is telling herself a story too. I was so busy protecting my secret that I nearly let it cost you the truth. That was her, telling me her own flaw, out loud, on the worst and strangest night of both our lives. That's the kind of woman she is. Even her apologies do the math honestly. The marriage was annulled within 2 months. There wasn't much to argue about. Brooke didn't fight it. In one of the last conversations we ever had, she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I don't even know who I would have been if they'd let me want something small." And I believed her. That was the tragedy of Brooke Callahan. She was a real person who had been raised to be a solution, and by the time anyone asked her what she actually wanted, she'd forgotten she was allowed to want anything at all. The Callahans lost the house within the year. Not because my mother took it. She never touched it. They lost it exactly the way she'd said they would. A little more every month, the credit finally catching up with the appearance. The last I heard, Gerald and Diane had moved to a modest place 2 states away. A place with no chandelier and no curved staircase and no photographs of anyone born mid-vacation. I don't wish them harm. I hope somewhere in the smaller life they found something true. But I don't know that people always do. My mother went back to work the following Monday, the way she had every Monday for 40 years. Except now, sometimes, she lets me come to the office. The real one. The top floor with her name on the wall. She still drives the same used car. She still keeps the blue flowered plates. She still lives above the laundromat, though she owns the whole building now and the block and most of the street, and every time I point that out she just says, "It's a good location, Devin. I like the hum of the dryers. It reminds me where I started." I asked her once why she never left, why she kept living small when she could live like a queen. And she said, "Because the day I start needing people to see what I have is the day I stop knowing what I'm worth. I spent my whole life making sure nobody could take my dignity by taking my money. You can't lose what you never put on display." I think about that sentence more than any other thing anyone has ever said to me. So here is what I learned. Standing in a marble hall watching a fleet of black Escalades pull up to end my wedding. We are so quick to decide what a person is worth from the outside. From the car they drive, the work they do, the clothes they wear, the neighborhood they live in, the shape of their hands, the color of their skin. The Callahans looked at my mother and saw a woman beneath them, and they built an entire strategy on that assumption. And the assumption was the thing that destroyed them. Not her wealth, not her Escalades, their own certainty that they already knew her. Every single day, we all pass people we've decided we've already understood. The quiet one, the tired one, the one in the uniform. And we have no idea, none, what 40 years of somebody's patient, invisible strength has built where we aren't looking. My mother was never the least powerful person in any room she ever cleaned. She was almost always the most. She just never needed you to know it. And the ones who mistreated the woman they thought had nothing, they were really just showing her exactly who they were, and she was patient enough to let them. Be kind to the person you think has nothing. Not because they might secretly own the building, but because a person's worth was never yours to measure in the first place. So let me leave you with this. If a fleet of black Escalades pulled up to your life tomorrow and revealed the truth about how you'd been treating the quiet, underestimated people around you, would you be proud of what those headlights showed? Tell me in the comments. I'd really like to know.